Welcome back to Pace Immigration, paceimmigration.com, joined once again by immigration lawyer Michael O'Rourke. Michael, good to see you.
Hi, Sean. How's it going?
Going very well. We've got a little bit of, if you're watching on the YouTube channel as opposed to the podcast, we've got some alphabet soup on the screen right now, which we'll talk about. So this, what we're going to talk about today, work in the U.S. through the TN visa. But underneath that, we've got CUSMA, USMCA, NAFTA TN visa for certain professionals. Michael, what's the deal with all this alphabet soup?
Well, as a U.S. immigration lawyer, I can only talk in form numbers and acronyms. So CUSMA is the new NAFTA if you're on the Canadian side of the border. USMCA is the new NAFTA on the U.S. side of the border because, of course, with the beauty of NAFTA being interchangeable on either side of the border, the governments couldn't handle that. So CUSMA stands for Canada-US-Mexico Agreement. Right. USMCA is US-Mexico-Canada Agreement. And NAFTA is the old North American Free Trade Act.
Right.
Really, they're all the same.
They're all the same, and you still hear people use NAFTA as the shorthand. The old hands, I guess, in the legal departments are still saying NAFTA here and there, but it's all the same thing. And what we're getting at is underneath NAFTA, there is a way, or excuse me, the CUSMA, there is a way for Canadians and Mexicans to work in the United States relatively easily compared to people in the rest of the world. And so take us through this slide here. What is the TN visa? As we've got it, streamlined visa status for work authorization in the United States. Go ahead, Michael.
Yes, so it is a very streamlined, simple visa process. It is really just restricted to citizens of Canada or Mexico. Permanent residents do not count, unfortunately, under this treaty. You have to have a full or part-time job offer from a U.S. employer. There are occasional instances where you can use a TN based on a Canadian or Mexican employment situation, but those are rare and difficult. Okay. So in general, U.S. job offer, full or part-time, U.S. citizen, Canadian or Mexican citizen, and generally this applies to 63 or 64 different professional categories. And for almost all of them, the vast majority, you need either a bachelor's degree level of education or a professional license in the field.
Right, and we've got here that it's good for 3 years, maximum of 3 years. It is renewable, however, and Mexican citizens, a little bit different. Most Canadians get it for 3 years and then have to renew, but Mexican citizens generally 12 months.
Yes, that's true. So because of the different types of approaches to application, Canadian citizens apply generally at a border or pre-flight inspection, and CBP can give Canadians up to 3 years, but depending on what job is on offer and how long the job offer is for, that can be significantly shorter, but 3 years is the max. Mexican citizens, for instance, they can be offered a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year job, but they're only going to get a visa to work in the U.S. for 1 year at a time.
Okay, and that is renewable. You can renew it as many times as they renew it. Is that right? There's no cap.
Exactly.
Okay, let's get into what matters to probably most of the people tuning in, which is how can I work in the United States? They've probably heard about the TN visa and that it makes things easy. Let's talk about what some of the jobs are, and they're actually quite. Some of them are kind of eclectic. You know, you wouldn't think like soil scientists and things are on there, which you don't automatically think of as too many people applying for, but there's probably some of them out there. Let's go through this list a little bit. It's mainly broken down into medical, science, and then there's some teaching, isn't there?
Exactly. So you have to understand that these occupations are 25, 30 years old. The NAFTA and then the new NAFTA, CUSMA or USMCA, didn't really update the professions list. So, you know, you'll see a lot of newer economy jobs that sometimes don't really fit well into these designations. So you've got traditional occupations like lawyers, nurses, physicians, only if they are researching or teaching, not actually practicing,
Right.
engineers, accountants. Then you have a lot of scientific occupations, psychologists, physiotherapists, recreational therapists, veterinarians. Uh, I would say that the majority of the NAFTA categories are in science and medicine
Right. Now,
occupations.
it's a great. So let's boil it down for what it really is. Is it makes it easy, relatively easy for a Canadian. All they need is a job offer, and then they can go and work in the United States. Which means it also makes it a lot easier for the employer. And we'll get into what the employer has to look at. But let's look at who's eligible. So as we've already stated, Canadians and Mexicans, permanent residents don't apply. And then let's get down into this bachelor's degree or professional licensing stuff.
Sure. So usually the gold standard in a TN application is a bachelor's degree. And with a bachelor's degree, they're generally looking for a degree granted in US, Canada, or Mexico. However, if you have a degree from outside of North America, you can do a degree equivalency. And if it is equivalent to a US bachelor's degree, then you can use that. Some professions do not require a bachelor's degree, namely management consultant, which is based more on your work history for the past 5 years, or a degree, or the scientific technologist, scientific technician category. That is based on a 2-year degree plus experience in the field. For that category, if you are relying on a certificate or diploma program, that program must have been done in Canada or Mexico.
Okay. So the bottom line is basically you're without a bachelor's degree, it's probably an uphill battle for most of the stuff on the list.
Exactly. Sometimes, if somebody has, say, 20 years of experience in the field, but they don't have the degree itself, we can do an equivalency to check to with one of the educational credentials associations to see if their experience would actually be equivalent to a bachelor's degree. That can be an uphill battle, as you said, but I've seen it happen and work a few times.
Okay. Let's carry on. We've talked about the credentials and degrees. I think we've drilled down into this pretty well that you have to. But one thing that is interesting that we should point out, the degree field must be closely aligned with the field of work. That is, if you have a degree in something in the sciences and then you want to go do a job in something completely unrelated, that could be a problem, no?
Yes, it is a problem. So they want to make sure that you not only have the credentials, but you have the experience as well. And so, for instance, as a lawyer, I could not apply as an engineer. Well, nobody would hire me, but I couldn't apply as an engineer because I don't have the right degrees in my background, and I wouldn't be competent at doing the work. So that's what they're really looking for when they're adjudicating these applications.
Right. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm guessing that if an engineering firm hired you, they'd want to see that Michael O'Rourke is going to be in their legal department, say.
Yes.
Okay.
With a big salary and benefits and everything else. So.
This turned into a pitch. I like it.
No, I'm super happy where I'm at. So.
And prospective employee to qualify with we have it written here on the slide. Some occupational fields permit the prospective employee to qualify with a certificate or diploma, but they must be issued by an institution in North America. There's that distinction between diploma and degree.
Exactly. So when we say degree, we mean a bachelor's or higher. And one thing I do want to get back to before we leave this slide, Sean, is that degree field closely aligned. Sometimes it's 1-to-1. So, for instance, if you have an economics degree and you are hired as an economist, that is a 1-to-1 correlation that makes sense. However, in the past, for instance, the economist field or the economist category in the TN allowed for many other types of jobs, but the government has cracked down on that. Will only allow economists to be used for economist positions. However,
no, go ahead.
there are many other quantitative positions and quantitative degree fields that we can look at that have much more wiggle room, for instance. So, like the statistician or mathematician TN categories have a much broader range of the occupations that can work in them. So if you're looking at the degree fields, which I believe are going to be posted on our website, you'll notice that there are very distinct job categories, but sometimes there are ways to use non-traditional degrees or degrees that are not exactly one-to-one with that field in order to qualify for TN. So best to ask us if you have a question.
I was going to say, yeah, the best thing to do is give you a call and say, here's what I've got.
Exactly.
And you'll be able to, you've done this, hundreds of times. You can lay it out for them, what their chances are depending on what they want to do. Let's move on to the U.S. employer consideration. We spend a lot of time talking about employees, and no wonder. You could have a veterinarian out there, or a hotel manager, or someone sees that that profession on the list and thinks, I really want to move down to Florida or something, so they call you. But there are employer considerations too, and the TN visa actually does make it pretty simple to find good talent north and south of the border.
Exactly. That's one of the beauties of the TN, is that in a TN employment situation, the employer doesn't have to sponsor the foreign national like they would for other visa categories. For instance, there's not a large petition that has to be filed with USCIS. You don't have to maintain any special records, such as a public access file or other documentation showing that you've hired this foreign worker. It is a very straightforward process, like you would hire any other U.S. authorized employee. You just have to do the I-9 process, and a TN employee can get a Social Security number once they've been in the U.S. for a few days.
Do you find, in your experience, what's it been like? Are employers leery of the TN if they don't really understand it, that it is that easy? They think it's like hiring a foreign worker and there's going to be a lot of trouble? Or have you found employers seem to be, in those professions, they understand it? It's been around long enough.
It has been around for a while, but still employers, if they haven't done it before, they worry about how much work they're going to have to do. And honestly, for the employers that we represent or employers who are involved in these TN cases, usually it's just a matter of providing us a good job description so that we can portray that to CBP or to the U.S. consulates in Mexico, and to sign off on a letter that we draft, really just describing the position and why it qualifies as a TN.
Okay, so employers, if you're out there, it is fairly simple if you're using someone like Michael to get these things done. So let's talk about Canadians and Mexicans specifically with the job offer. Canadians have two options when applying for a TN visa. The first, it sounds ridiculously simple, that if you have some paperwork, a resume and a CV, and you're actually qualified, you have that degree that we've already gone into, you really just need a letter from an employer.
Yeah, that's it. They like to see a written job offer. They want to see that you are who you say you are. That they'd like to see your resume. You must bring your original degree. Otherwise, they will say, no, sorry, can't do it.
Right off the wall, off the wall, the degree. Okay.
And I have seen people sitting in secondary inspection with their degrees in frames that they've taken off their walls.
Okay.
Because CBP has this, they have to put their fingerprints on it for some reason.
Okay.
So, and then if somebody hires us, either the employee or the employer will add additional information. We'll add information about the TN category and what that type of job looks like in the occupational handbook that's put out by the Department of Labor. And so you take that package to CBP, you pay them a $50 fee if they're going to issue the TN, and in a couple hours, you're legal and you can work in the United States from that moment on.
What's the biggest hiccup that you've seen in your experience if there is a hiccup that someone gets caught in? What is it?
A couple things. Somebody who might have done it on their own and didn't have all of the information or misrepresented the job or the offer. Uh, we get that fairly frequently, actually, and uh, those can be delicate situations because CBP has already made notes as to why they've rejected you. So occasionally seen situations where people are making a second or third or fourth application and they've become removed from the United States and banned from applying for a while. Other times we'll see that they maybe just don't have the right information or they don't have their original degree. Usually, though, TN is so straightforward that depending on the job category that you're applying under, it's usually very straightforward.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's very straightforward if you get someone to look at it first. Going down to the border and taking your chances. It sounds like you could wind up in a situation where you've been denied entry to the United States, and you don't want that on your record, do you?
Exactly, because then you have to get a waiver.
Right.
So what I always suggest to people, whether they're our clients or not, is to go to a large port of entry, either a pre-flight inspection at one of the major Canadian airports, or a large crossing like Buffalo, or Peace Bridge on the West Coast. Peace Bridge in Buffalo, or the
Ambassador.
Peace Arch.
Yeah.
I never recommend they go to Ambassador Bridge.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, the Michigan ports of entry. Talk to me. And then there's another one in Montana and Alberta that we just recommend never ever going to.
This is a whole new video. We're getting to. Okay, great.
Where not to go.
Yeah.
But like Peace Arch, Blaine in Washington State / BC, those are also very good ports. You want to go during business hours, during the week, so that you can see a free trade officer who's going to have the most information and understand the TN category the best. You don't want to go at 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning when you're going to get some poor CBP officer who doesn't really do this all the time.
Interesting. That's great advice. The second thing we have here, there is a way to do an application on Form I-129. It involves quite a bit of a higher fee, and it's also a longer process.
Yes, exactly. So your fee goes up from $50 to $460. Plus, if you want premium processing to get a response in quicker than 6 months or so, you're going to have to pay another $2,500. USCIS is generally the what I would consider a last resort. However, if you've been denied at a port of entry, and if there are issues with your application, or CBP just doesn't understand what you do, and in the context of the TN application, maybe USCIS is the way to go. But because of the time and cost, I usually don't recommend it.
Okay, let's move on to Mexico. Visa application process for Mexicans, somewhat similar, but a little more stringent. There's a couple of application fees. You have an interview with a consular office and some other details. Go into this, Michael.
Sure. So you have to first file a DS-160, which is the Universal State Department visa application form, and pay a fee of, I believe, $190. I'll double check that, but that's what comes off the top of my head. Okay. You have to set up an appointment at one of the consulates in Mexico. There are quite a few of them, but sometimes it lags, especially with the COVID pandemic. We've been seeing appointments taking months to be issued. Other documentation, you're going to need the same thing: a written job offer for prearranged employment in the U.S., full-time or part-time, your resume, your Mexican passport, your original degree, And if you got your titulo in Mexico, you're also going to need your cedula from the Secretary of Public Education. That is a must at the consulate, and the consulate will deny if you do not bring those.
Great advice. Okay.
The consulate will also usually tell you right there if it's approved on the spot. Sometimes they have to do something called administrative processing, which can take a couple extra days, sometimes longer. But generally, visas are approved on the spot, and you have them back at the application support center within a week. And then you're, again, once you have the visa in hand, you're able to go into the U.S., ask for admission as a TN, and begin working.
One thing I was thinking of, the passport that you have to have, is it a lot like being a tourist? If it, when you go down for a tour, say you're from Canada, it's usually 6 months, but if your visa, or excuse me, your passport expires in the next 4 months, they're going to say something. Is it the same here, that if they're going to let you in for 3 years, your passport better be good for that?
Well, sometimes it's impossible to renew a passport more than 6 months or a year in advance, just depending on your nationality. So we always say check the date of your passport before you start in on this process. If it's possible to renew fairly quickly, if you're coming up to an expiry date within the first year, renew it. If that's not possible, what you can do, say if you have a Mexican passport that expires in 8 months, you can take your old passport with the valid visa in it and your new passport and present those both when you're entering the US. With Canadians, you would just bring your old passport with the TN stamp. I would also suggest bringing your application materials from the time that you applied for the TN and have CBP look at it again and then give you another period of admission on your TN.
Excellent. Okay, so we've covered it pretty comprehensively. The upshot is, if you're on that list, which you can find on paceimmigration.com, of occupations, it's relatively simple to go and live and work in the United States. And Michael O'Rourke can help you out. Michael, what do you want to see from an employer or an employee when they contact you saying, hey, let's talk TN visa?
I just really want to know what exactly the job is. And I always love dealing in job descriptions produced by HR, because that really gives me an idea of the duties and how we can relate the degree to the duties. Titles can be flexible, but the job duties really tell us where we're going. And when we want to compare it to Department of Labor resources, that the more information that we have about the job, the better.
Okay. Michael O'Rourke, O'Rourke at pacelawfirm.com. Get in touch with him. Michael, we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds great, Sean. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.